Hello, everyone. My name is Maricarmen Garza, and I'm the Chief of Programs at the Tahirih Justice Center, an interdisciplinary and trauma-informed legal organization that serves immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. I am also the chair of the ABA Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence. And today, on behalf of the Commission and our co-sponsor, the Standing Committee on Gun Violence, it is my honor to welcome you to our Write and Tell Live series. Before I introduce our wonderful guests, I would like to share some background on why we created the Write and Tell Live series. As lawyers, we know that storytelling wins cases. This is especially true in gender-based violence cases. Facts and how the law applies to it are vitally important, of course, but it is the compelling stories that lawyers share and elicit from their clients, the theories of the case, the contextualization of the behaviors that cuts off victim blaming, dismantles biases, and educates the trier of fact for survivors to win. Storytelling can also be a very powerful part of a healing journey for a survivor. Our Write and Tell series uplifts the written work and the storytelling of the scholars and leaders in our field. Our guest today, Ruth Glenn, is a liaison to the Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and now also the National Domestic Violence Hotline under Project Opal, where she serves as President of Public Affairs. This is after she served as CEO and president since 2014. Ruth has been an advocate and a national domestic violence expert for decades. And when she's not busy testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee, advocating for gun control, meeting U.S. presidents, advocating for the reauthorization of VAWA, serving on boards, moderating and presenting on panels, and teaching the next generation of advocates, she had the time to write the most wonderful memoir, Everything I Never Dreamed, My Life in Surviving and Standing Up to Domestic Violence. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Maricarmen. What a wonderful introduction. Yes, that's who I am. Trying to remain a voice, and the book is absolutely a part of that.
Well, tell me a little bit about this wonderful book. As you know, I listened to it on audiobook and then I went and got myself a copy. It was that good. How did you come about writing this book? I mean, you're so busy. Like, what happened?
Interestingly enough, my friends have always said you should write a book because I've been doing this speaking at least 25 years, using my voice, as you know, from the book, talking about domestic violence. And particularly my friends have said, you should write your book. And I always said, yeah, okay, whatever. Interestingly enough, I made a television appearance during the general election. And I kept getting these phone calls from this strange number. And I was like, who is it? Finally, I picked up the phone. I'm metaphorically saying that. And it was Simon & Schuster and Atria Books. And he is wonderful. And he said, we think you have a story and we want to be a part of writing that and getting that out. And so began a 2-year journey of putting that story together.
That is amazing. And I'm so glad they did and they reached out to you. But 2 years, I mean, what was the process like for you in coming to write this book?
Well, I should also say that I absolutely had a ghostwriter. There was, thank goodness, because there were times where it truly was painful. As much as you talk about it, and you and a lot of folks in this field of work know this, as much as you talk about it, there are still times where you may have repressed memories, or you remember something differently, or it just comes up and wells up. The first year was really difficult because not only was I recounting a lot of events that were difficult and hurtful and painful, but I was also undergoing back surgery. So it was this very interesting time. And I must tell you that there were a couple of times I needed to take a break and just say, I cannot right now. Or we would be in the middle of doing some writing and I would just sort of break down. That was the first year. The second year, it was a little bit easier, as you can tell through the book that there's this first year of retelling and recounting what I call my survivorship, and then the second part is really what do we do now. So
Thank you for sharing that because I wondered that as I was reading the book and even like reading from your notes, right? That at one point you were looking at a police report that you hadn't seen since the day that this had happened and probably never had prior to, and how different you remembered it. And I could only think what you were going through and like reliving those experiences, which I think many of our clients, experience as well as we
absolutely.
are working with them, preparing them to court and having to, really think through some really painful and difficult experiences. Um, you mentioned that you took some time off. What other things did you do to kind of take care of yourself through that process?
Um, I think that even in the book, I talk a lot about my wonderful support network. And amazingly enough, there were times that they would just randomly check on me because they knew I was going through this process. But quite frankly, I also did. I'm an introvert. I know it's hard to believe, but I am an introvert. So there were many times that I just kind of, did my thing of, I call it metaphorically curling into a fetal position and just taking a day or two and letting myself feel the pain or the depression or try to figure out what it is that got me this way today and how do I live with it and move through it because I'm also a person that I try very hard not to sit in it. Lots of just really recognizing because here's the other interesting thing really quickly. Um, After the first year, it was also easier because I recognized that I got through it.
Mm.
When you're writing about it, you find yourself sort of back in it. Um, the second year, um, a lot easier because it's like, oh, look at there, look what I did. So I hope that answered the question.
It definitely does. And I hear an echo. Is it just me? Do you hear my echo?
I do not.
Okay.
That
Um,
means nothing.
well, I know you mentioned your friends, and I love that part about the book when you talk about the unusual suspects.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit more about their supporting you and how you cultivated this group of friends that were so instrumental in your journey as to where you are now.
They started with Reggie. Reggie was one of the first people I told, and I walk through that in the book. But slowly but surely, her and I became really, really strong in our friendship, and we brought our friends together in this group, and we've been going for 30 years. Um, they are the most beautiful, strong, supportive women. I hope they feel the same about me. I always ask them, "Do you feel the same about me?" um, and I gotta tell you, I consider them family because I think you recognize through the reading of the book that I don't have family here, and I do have family, but none of us are close. A lot of circumstantial stuff, but so I consider them my family, and having them reach out every once in a while and say, "Are you okay?" is
Yeah.
wonderful.
You mentioned Reggie, and I think to me when I was reading your book. And, having done domestic violence work as a lawyer, I realized, oh, this is what's going to happen next. Like I could almost like there was you sharing what was happening internally to somebody that was not in your immediate family, which is your friend Reggie, your coworker. Um, Tell me a little bit about that and what changed and what shifted in your journey towards survivorhood.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I had met Reggie only one time, and I had actually met her through my husband because of our work environment and my then husband. And interestingly enough, it was also around the time where I was just trying to figure out what to do because I was watching my son become more physically intimidated by him. And I was reaching a point where I was just desperate internally. In my mind, I was desperate. I wasn't showing it outwardly, of course. And there was something about her that was reassuring in general.
Mhm.
And I walked over and I just said, I, I think I need help. And because she is a helper, she's like, well, do this, do that. Um, but that truly, there were a couple of points in that year that were truly the pivot points for doing something different. The other one was my supervisor who said, I think you're being abused. I mean, she didn't say it quite that way, but those were I tell people all the time, you know, we have a lot of expectations of survivors. Let's put our own expectation in perspective, which is we should expect from us that we plant the seed. We plant the
Amazing.
seed that says, I think you might be going through something. How can I help you? Um, we do too much of they're already overburdened and overwhelmed, and particularly in legal matters and such. What can I do for you? I may not be able to do it, but what can I do for you?
That is so powerful that you share that because I think there is so much shame, you
Oh,
know, surrounding this, and I think people don't know what to do, or maybe they're noticing, but maybe they're afraid to ask, as they might be maybe
yes.
overstepping, or there's so many issues. But it's wonderful that you're saying this was actually really helpful, that other people noticed and they stepped in and they asked. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, because I'm
Oh,
sure
yeah.
we have listeners who are thinking the same thing. And it's like, oh, I wish I could say something, but you know, I would also. What do you think about like taking the lead from you? I mean, in your point, you were ready to start sharing and asking more questions, but any guidance for individuals who may be noticing and may want to say something to a
Yeah.
survivor?
Absolutely. I get the question quite frequently. And my advice from my experience, which can certainly be different for other people, but what I always advise is never saying, I think you're going through domestic violence. Always saying, I think there's something going on for you. I care about you. And when you're ready, I'm going to be here for you, making sure that we don't say leave or I think you're experiencing domestic violence, and expecting that they're probably not going to respond right away. You're right, the shame, the fear, all of those things are real. And even if it's somebody that they feel like they could trust, how do you say to somebody? I mean, I'm still amazed to this day that I went up to Reggie and said that. But it was at the point where I just didn't, I, I mean, I was walking in a blur because
Yeah.
I could not figure out my life, right?
I
Uh,
think in your book, you said something to the effect of, I was more scared of not what was
yes.
happening in my own home than the fear of the unknown and what would happen when others found out. And that was one of the turning points. And of course, the impact on your son David was um, really, really big as a part of a turning point as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I forgot I said that, but that is true. And that doesn't mean that all survivors will get to that point. They just need, what I say is, going back to plant the seed so they know they can come to you when and if they're ready.
That's right. Well, let me ask you this, going back a little bit about the book, right? So, as you wrote this, and of course, I'm so glad that you did. Who was your intended audience, and
Oh,
what did you want to create with this book?
there were two audiences that I definitely had in mind. Of course, there's peripheral audiences, but truly, I wanted most of all, of course, where my heart lies is with survivors and advocates. And I'm not talking about you and I, Maricarmen. I'm talking about um, those that are working in domestic violence programs and they wonder if they're making an impact and what can they do. And survivors who are saying to themselves, either I got to figure out how to leave safely or I've left, now what? I think I talk to you about every once in a while. I have a survivor that says, "Well, I'm not ready to speak up." Well, you don't have to be. You need to figure out your own journey. I'm just a loudmouth, um, but the other audience, so survivors and advocates. I just feel like advocates. I hope that they read this and know that they can make a difference. Because it was my friends, but it was also advocates, and it was people that just cheered me on, and my first speaking engagement and that kind of thing. The second is systems, mostly the judicial system, quite frankly. I really wanted, as you said at the outset of this, is that, a system, and I could speak as a system person. I worked in government for 25 years. So
That's right.
in human services and child welfare and all of that. So I get it. But sometimes we forget what survivors have to go through. Um, again, going back to our other premise, which is survivors need to leave. We're a helping society for the most part. So we're going to fix it. Just leave. Well, as systems, I would hope that this book will offer some insight into what some survivors might be experiencing, particularly emotionally, because we're human beings, we operate emotionally. Um, and sometimes survivors make decisions that we go, what was that? My hope is that it will lend some insight into why it always appears that they may not be making the decisions we want them to, particularly as a judicial system. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. And again, looking at your book and your life journey and your experience, um, the violence did not end the moment that you left. In fact, it actually felt to me like that really escalated in a substantial way. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because like it seems like it took you some time, but then you did everything that you were supposed to do, right? The protective order, you left, you were doing the work, and still the violence was not ending. Um, can you share a little bit about that?
Oh, first of all, thank you, Mara Carmen, because I do think that that's a very important part of the book and really around that whole premise that as a society, we just want a victim survivor of domestic violence to leave. Well, I did everything right. You're absolutely correct. Um, I, I, I tried everything to keep me and my son safe. I mean, I could go into great detail. It's in the book, most of it, but I mean, I even went as far as, ridiculously, now that I look back on it, leaving things for him in the home that I knew he cared about so that he wouldn't be overly upset, when I left him, metaphorically in the middle of the night. The harassment, the stalking, um, all of that just persisted. 6 months after I left, he kidnapped me because he just got to that point where he needed to regain that control so badly. I mean, I was like, within the arm's reach in his mind. And my son and I were just keeping him from having that control. So he kidnapped me. I was able to get away from that, and he got charged with felony kidnapping. And then we
And,
go ahead. Yeah.
and I noticed it was not a domestic violence charge,
No,
even though you were married, had a child together. It was just a kidnapping, which,
it was
not
just
to
a
minimize that was,
right.
but there was some additional factors that were making this even a more gruesome
Right.
crime.
It's so funny because I think on the police report, family violence wasn't checked. And I didn't know that until just, while I was writing the book. And I'm like, what? How did this so happen like this? So anyway, after the kidnapping, he got charged with felony kidnapping. He was very, very upset. It escalated. I got a protection order, and that was it. I was told when to come back for court. So there wasn't kind of like this follow up or, I don't know how to say it, but do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I was pretty much out there on my own. I mean, literally, with a temporary protection order. 2 months later, I I sort of lost my mind for a moment. I got tired of being controlled. I really did. I was so exhausted. I felt like the 8 months since I had been gone were probably the most exhausting period of time. I had to watch my back. He was sleeping outside my window. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I was exhausted, and I pretty much told him, I was exhausted, and boy, did that cause a problem. That's the day, 8 months after I left, roughly, is when he followed me and shot me and left me for dead. And what I tell people is this is a perfect example of an escalation.
Mhm.
And I love that you said I did everything right, because I still go back to that every once in a while and say, I did everything right. I did. You know, uh, I remember at one point too that one of the times I had to flee to a safe house, and Advocate got a little upset with me because I was calling him, but I had to know where he was, because I knew that he had potential to kill me.
You know, that is something that I hear from my clients. The not knowing, knowing where the next shoe's going to drop, the not, because there was some level of understanding and how to take care of yourself when you knew those things.
Yes,
But when it was, that information is no longer there, a lot of my clients are really, really fearful because they don't understand what's going to happen. And that connection sometimes is what allows them to continue to stay safe for themselves and their children. And that's
absolutely.
a hard thing that many systems don't understand as to why there might be continued contact after a separation. So,
Absolutely. And just one more quick note. I would like to um, remind us too, as we're talking about this, um, I happen to be a bit more fortunate than some survivors. I had access to funds, not a lot, but I had my own job that somebody kept me in. My job decided to keep me, and they worked around what my needs were. I had a car. Um, you know, Imagine survivors that uh, have even that to worry about because they don't have access to resources. I didn't know domestic violence resources, but I had resources to some degree.
yeah, I think about that in the context of the work that I do now. When
Yeah,
somebody's an
exactly.
immigrant survivor, in addition to,
Yes,
where there may be language barriers, cultural understanding of what systems responses could be, and I know how challenging that journey can be. Now, I know that you've done a lot of work, and you talk about it also in your book, but one of the most requested services for victims and survivors is legal assistance. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I know that you've been a lifelong advocate
yeah,
about that important need.
yeah. Um, it's amazing to me. First of all, I'm always amazed at the resiliency of survivors who finally have have had enough and they reach out to me personally. So my experience is that when they've reached out to me personally, it's because they don't feel like they can get anywhere else. It is usually about family court and their inability to find an appropriate legal representation in family court to minimize the abuse they're enduring in family court.
That's right.
We know, we know, we um, have, I don't know if it's new, but there certainly is a new approach to system abuse. That's not correct either, but you understand what I'm getting to. I've
Well, they
never
use
been.
the system
That's
to
right.
continue to abuse, and
Exactly.
having been, at legal aid working with survivors in custody disputes, like that is like the one area where they know it's going to hurt their victim. Is like if they continue to fight for the children and do certain things, not only is there continued access through the courts, but it's really
Yes.
hitting in the place that is like the my clients are most fearful about is losing their children to somebody who is violent and who uses violence to exert control. And that's really, really powerful. I think I just saw one of the comments that your book should be required reading for all attorneys and judges who practice family law. So I could not agree more.
I'm happy to make that happen if I can.
Still working
It's
on it. Yeah.
right. Um, System abuse. The other thing that's really interesting to me, just to cap off your question, um, it truly is a matter of control because we know, you and I in particular, and all of those that may be listening. I see Lydia here and Misty here, but here's what blows my mind is if the victim had the appropriate legal assistance, legal representation, attorney, whatever you want to call it, it would end the system abuse. But you know who mostly has the resources to do that?
Of course.
So you have a perpetrator of abuse who has the resources and can further abuse. And sometimes I am so upset by it in the calls that I get here that say, why aren't there enough attorneys? And I had one, but they know nothing about domestic violence. Well, yeah, that's not going to help you because it is unfortunately a niche, and somebody has to understand what that is. So
Yeah. The dynamics are
yes,
important, and telling
absolutely.
stories and like understanding the dynamics is really, really key. I know the Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence does a fantastic job of training lawyers who are focusing on the area of working with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, but there is so much more that needs to be done. But
Yeah.
thank you for elevating that. And I think a lot of the folks who are commenting agree with you of how important that is that
Yes.
individuals are trained and that know how to work not only the dynamics of the violence that's happening, but how to work with survivors and, you know, uh, talking about their story and believing the work that needs to be done and why it's important to protect. I think, oftentimes we are told we need to move forward, that happened in the past, completely, not acknowledging
Yeah.
and understanding what has transpired, but the continued danger to everybody that's involved. To minimize that, it would be a real danger in a legal setting. Yes, judicial training is also really, really important. Now, you did most of this writing on your book based on your personal story, but did you do any additional like research towards this end to write your book?
I, there's the personal research, and then there was the more professional research. The personal research was really eye-opening. Going back through stuff that's we all have filed in the garage, and then having my writer help say, well, what about this? And I'm like, oh, I forgot all about that. And then needing to do the whole, research for that and that kind of thing. Very fascinating process. I would also say that, yes, a lot of research on what we've done since 1974 about domestic violence specifically, but then also what are the other key kind of policies that have um, all of them that we support, you, me, and others in the field, had good intentions. Are they still um, appropriate? And are we still finding that they are helpful to what we're trying to do? We had a great discussion a couple of weeks ago about, are we going to end domestic violence? And I say, well, I can't even wrap my head around that because I just want to know what the next iteration of violence is going to be,
Yeah.
So, from a policy perspective. And then, secondly, I'm always very concerned about what we are or are not doing for advocates who are doing this work. They have a hard job. And more, I think the demands on them are sometimes overwhelming, most of the time overwhelming. So what do we do about that? And not from a necessarily policy perspective, but the
Mhm.
research shows that their recidivism is high, their
Right.
turnover.
That's right.
Because we're asking so much of them. And so that's the kind of research I did, on VAWA and, how all that started and what are some of the other policies that we've come up with. And, um, really my interest in advocates and how they're being impacted.
Thank you so much for that because, as an advocate and
Yeah,
I started doing this work. Sometimes we don't really know the exact history of our movement and how we got where we were there. So to me, this was also really essential and pivotal reading for somebody that wants to understand how we got to where we are, what's still needed. And, of course, we're seeing this through your own journey through this process, which was really, really brilliant. Um,
thank you.
Now, I know that you did this also as a recording because that's how I was first introduced. I was like, "Oh, Audible, this is perfect.
Yeah.
I can listen to this on my way to work." And I had a couple of like work related trips. That I was like, "Okay, I'm going to listen to Ruth," and it was wow. I mean, at times I had to stop as I was driving because it was so powerful. But tell us a little bit about your recording journey. Like, you read this, you wrote it with your, that you did
Right.
the process of writing, but then you had to go in and like read this. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, there was thank you so much for asking. There were a couple of things. My publisher said, I think you've got to put your voice to this. And I said, oh, this voice? And he said, yes. Um, and so I agreed. During the time that I was scheduling, because everything has to be on a timeline when you're writing a book, doing an audio book. I also had to have surgery, back surgery. So I did the audio recording. I began 2 weeks after back surgery, sitting in a studio, doing the audio recording, and in pain, but also had, yes, there were, I get a little choked up even thinking about it, but there were probably the second week, this went 7 Saturdays for 4 hours each Saturday. And it was the second and third Saturdays that I just sort of had meltdowns. I didn't leave the studio or anything like that, but the director would say, Ruth, let's give you 10 minutes. This is really hard for you right now. I will be honest with you. It's usually about I'm honest. No, not going to tell the truth.
You're
I
not under oath, but it's okay.
right. I will tell you, it usually centers around my son
Mm.
and what he endured and what he's been enduring. And so whenever I get to those parts, it's something, or my grandchildren, something happens inside. After that, and I was able to come off the pain pills, get through the really difficult parts. It was still, pretty time consuming, but I was so proud when I was done.
Mm.
And I was like, I did that. I did an audiobook.
You did that, and it was so powerful to hear your voice,
Yeah.
as I was, driving and, going, I know her, and I didn't know you at the
Yeah.
same time, and it was like, wow, Ruth, like, you know, I I was so proud of you, and I went along that journey with you. And one of the things that struck me as you were just speaking, you have been telling your story over and over again, and it's like this has been, I think you mentioned, a part of your healing journey, and even then, it is still difficult to share. And I think that that's really important for us as advocates, as individuals that work in this field where we do work with so many survivors, to always be mindful that retelling the story may feel different at different times, and that we know that the impact of trauma can resurface at any moment. So really important to take care of ourselves and take care of those who are sharing stories with us. So, any upcoming projects that you're working on? What's the next book?
I do have to share this thing as you asked. I spoke with my publisher about 2 weeks ago about some marketing stuff, and he said, Ruth, we're here for you, and blah blah blah. And he said, let us know when you're ready for your next book. And I went, no, not gonna happen. No. And he was serious, and I was too. Right now, I gotta be honest. Again, not that I would lie to you, but I am working on Project Opal. The merger has been really intense. We're doing some good things, but it really has been a real project, and I'm looking forward to developing, this Project Opal NCADV NDBH thing as we come out. I will
So,
never. Oh, go
so
ahead.
for anybody who's listening who is not familiar with Project Opal, can you just share a little bit
Oh,
more
yeah.
about what that is? And I want to make sure that folks understand some of the changes, I'm excited about it, but I want others to really like engage and know what this means.
Absolutely. Project Opal is now what we refer to as the merging of the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, which I was, up until December, the president and CEO for 8 years. We've had many, many, many talks over the past 2 years in particular about how to better serve the domestic violence victims and survivors, better serve advocates, and how to find, as Katie Ray Jones would say, and find the synergy to do service provision better. And I don't mean just the hotline calls. I mean, how do we make sure that survivors, if they want to use their voice, can use their voice? How do we make sure that in Congress and all of the other um, state houses, that survivors are heard with respect and dignity if that's what they're choosing to do? So the list goes on and on and on, but that's what we began. We signed our paperwork in December, and we will remain NCADV. They will remain the National Domestic Violence Hotline. But Project Opal will be doing some really powerful stuff over the next few months, and we're very excited about that.
Great. So then there's going to be a book about that, huh?
Yeah.
Yes.
God, no. The other thing is, and everyone that knows me know that I talk about this ad nauseum, but I have taken on the guardianship of a 13-year-old, and it's keeps me plenty busy. My
I
granddaughter, I love her to death, but I tell you, it's a job. I wouldn't say it's a project, but it's definitely a job.
I get you. I have
Yeah,
a teenager or coming up teenager, so totally understand.
yeah.
Again, this book is so wonderful, Ruth, and I know I was
So,
sharing with Anya, one of the special treats of getting this book is that there's inserts with photographs. And for those of you who have read this book, or know, Miss Malcolm is here. We have pictures of Ruth with her son, David, her graduation. And the most prized one for me is Ruth at 13 in the book. So go get your book.
I love that picture.
Isn't
I tell
it?
people all the time, and it was my white mother was trying so desperately to do something with my hair, and it just
It's
yeah,
adorable,
yeah,
adorable.
yeah.
I know that our time here is almost coming to a close. So, is there any last words that you would like to share with our viewers, with those who are listening, just about this book, about your journey, about something that you want to share with survivors? I know I'm asking a lot, but what's the message that you want to get out there?
The message would be, um, my hope is that you do read the book, but whether you read the book or not, please remember, and this goes for survivors and those that support them and those that are interested in the issue of domestic violence. Remember, every survivor is different. We have a society that does not recognize what survivors go through, and we yet still don't know how to support them holistically. Please do your work. Every survivor will have a different story. I think I shared with you, Maricarmen, that every once in a while, give survivor says, I'm not ready to use my voice. And I tell them, nobody says you ever have to use your voice. Your journey, like we talked about earlier, is your journey. Mine was, honest to goodness, mine was laying on that pavement and the next few months trying to figure out why I was left alive. Sounds so cliche and dramatic, but I had to find purpose, and this was it. And so it began, so to speak. But that's mine. What I hope other people get out of the book is some insight that will help them as they deal with individual survivors.
Thank you. I think that message is very clear from reading it, and I am so grateful for you, for your
Thank
time,
you.
for sharing your book and all your experiences with us, and with all that you have done for survivors across the country. For those of you who would like to keep in touch with the Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence, or to learn more about future programming, to leave feedback to this event, please use the link that is being dropped in the chat now. And again, thank you to our co-sponsors, the Standing Committee
Yes,
on Against Gun Violence, and thank all of you for your time.
thank you. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Mary
Bye.
Carmen.
Bye-bye, Ruth.